we plan to cover, first and foremost, is protecting the investment. So an overview of the general fiscal management requirements of the YouthBuild AmeriCorps grant. Next, we'll take a deep dive into the AmeriCorps reimbursement process. So Johnny will debrief one of our homework assignments and take a look at the actual documentation included in a reimbursement request. And then tomorrow, our final session will be focused on key compliance concerns. So Michael and I will list out our top compliance concerns. We've both got a top 10 list. I'll be taking the expense side and Michael will take the match side. There was some pre-conference content. Give me a CC for crash course in the chat if you viewed the AmeriCorps fiscal crash course. Got some CCs, excellent. So the team put together a fiscal playlist that's available on YouTube. This covers a lot of the core fiscal management concepts, distilled down into 5 to 10 minute chunks. So it takes about an hour to review the entire thing. So if you wanted to revisit that, that is always accessible on YouTube. So we're gonna give you a quiz. Let me know if that music's too loud, everyone. Does anyone recognize this song? Let me know if it rings a bell. All right, so we're gonna take the fiscal crash course pop quiz. We're gonna test your knowledge. So our first video was on protecting the investments, so getting into the fiscal management requirements. So, number one, what does OMB stand for? Is it the Organization of Montreal Bagels, Office of Monetary Business, Orange Maple Butter? What they said, exactly, all right. So this is the Office of Management and Budget. This is basically the largest executive agency in the executive branch that oversees the federal budget, and they put out the uniform guidance that really defines the rules and regulations of this AmeriCorps grant and really any federal funding source. So if you already work with DOL, you're pretty well versed in uniform guidance. YouthBuild USA protects the investment through training and implementation, as well as routine monthly blank. What happens on a monthly basis? All right, we've got ARR, we've got reporting, ARRs. All right, a lot of folks saying ARR. I'll take that answer. I have monitoring, but the ARR is really there for monitoring purposes to ensure that you're knowledgeable of the requirements and actually demonstrating compliance. So I'll take that, I'll take the R. Question number 3 on protecting the investment. The YouthBuild AmeriCorps partnership is responsible for adhering to the AmeriCorps terms and conditions as well as federal blank guidance. Anyone recognize the song yet? Maybe you're too young, Johnny. Does it even ring a bell?
I think somebody did. I think somebody did say it in the chat.
The Sims. Someone said. Someone said tip of the tongue. Who was that? Let's see. Did it come to you? No. I guess maybe it's confirmation bias, but I don't know.
Not reading Rainbow. I love this. Okay, we'll keep going. So you guys got it right. Uniform guidance. All right, moving on to our next video, grant timeline. So Michael did this video. It covers the expenditure timeline, so answering the question of when you can and cannot build a grant. So question number 1, money follows blank. It's one of our core concepts, a rule of thumb for the timeline. All right, we got member, participant, the member, youth, member. Numbers. Anyone else? All right, members, okay. Members is correct, yes. So question number 2, you can build a grant blank days before the first AmeriCorps member enrolls and blank days after the final member exits. All right, we got some 30s, 30 days. All right, the answer is 30 days. So you can build the grant 30 days prior to the first member and 30 days after the final member exits. There are some exceptions for tangible goods. So if you're purchasing supplies that will eventually be used by your members throughout the grant year, you can still purchase and incur those costs prior to member enrollment. All right, then we move on to Are You Rad? Allowable costs. So this links back to the Uniform Guidance Cost Principles, sort of saying what you can and cannot bill to the grants. So hopefully you have heard of RAD before. We talk about it in our past conferences. What does R stand for in RAD? We got reasonable.
Yep. We got some folks jumping the gun here.
Jumping ahead. All right. So reasonable, we'll start there. So reasonable is basically would a prudent person be using these federal funds in a similar manner, and does it fit with the cost objective of the grant? All right, we'll take both A's. Let's give me both A's. All right, allocable, allowable. All right, there we go. Allowable, so it can't be one of the explicitly expressly unallowable costs in the uniform guidance, and it needs to be allocated according to your program's cost allocation plan. And finally, D, what does the D in RAD stand for? All right, documented. Rule of thumb, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. All right. Now we move over to the budget tutorial video. Question number 1. The AmeriCorps budget is made up of 2 sides, blank and match. So getting used to some AmeriCorps lingo here. All right, excellent. Expense and match. Sometimes it's referred to as the federal side, sometimes it's referred to as the AmeriCorps side, but if you're referring to it as you see it in the budget, in the reimbursement packet, we refer to that side as the expense side. All right, question number 2 on the budget, sources of match can be either cash or blank contributions. Excellent. In-kind. So in-kind contributions are those donated goods and services that you can count the value of towards your match requirements. And we'll get more into match in our final session on key compliance concerns. Next video on the reimbursement checklist. Monthly AmeriCorps reimbursement requests are uploaded via blank. So where do you go to upload those AmeriCorps reimbursement requests? Excellent, Dropbox. So Dropbox is really where we house most of your resources. So you can find the terms and conditions. You can find a lot of templates, sample timesheets, sample cost allocation plans. You'll find your reimbursement packet there. So your expense and match workbook is located in your fiscal Dropbox, and is also the location where you will upload reimbursement documentation. Next question, member service gear must bear the blank. All right, AmeriCorps logo, AC logo, exactly. All right, so any gear that you charge to the grants needs to have that AmeriCorps branding. Actually, I think AmeriCorps, I think they engaged a creative firm, so they might be updating the brands relatively soon. I think they did some research, and it seemed like 58% of people were in favor of a new logo, which I think the logo is fine, but that's my take. Let me know how you feel about the logo in the chat. All right. Next question, staff summary instructions. So staff cannot be billed to the grant prior to the blank date. All right, staff cannot be billed to the grant prior to the blank date. All right, we've got CHCs, we've got background checks, we've got enrollment. Clearance date, enrollment. A few different answers here, all right. So the answer is criminal history check clearance date. So as you're building your 2021 budget, if you have any new staff that have not been incorporated on a past AmeriCorps budget, you'll need to get them cleared, and we will need to get a criminal history check clearance date into the budget before you can build those staff. Next question, AmeriCorps hours divided by blank hours equal the percentage of gross pay that can be billed to the grant. All right, so now we're getting into the inner workings of the staff summary report. AmeriCorps hours divided by blank hours. All right, total hours, total work hours, payroll hours. Total hours is the correct answer. So timesheets need to account for the total hours worked at the organization. It shouldn't be just an AmeriCorps timesheet. It should be a timesheet for all of the funding sources that a staff person is working under. All right, Anastasia, if you want to throw the homework assignment link into the chat, give me an A+ in the chat if you completed the homework assignment. That's all it takes to get an A+. You just got to complete it. So let me know if you have already taken a look at that activity. All right, Anne, thank you. A+, A+. Jessica, A+, all right. All right, we're up to 4 people. I want to see some more A's. C-, all right. We'll have an opportunity during the break to take a look at that. All right, so Anastasia put a link to that activity into the chat. We encourage you to take a look at that activity, spend 10 or 20 minutes looking over the documents to see how many issues you can spot in that sample reimbursement request. And then Johnny will take some time during our next session that resumes at 2:30 to take a deeper look at that backup documentation. All right, so session objectives. We will cover fiscal updates. So any grant year updates, important dates, policy changes, everything to get you up and running with grant year 2021. Next, we'll cover understanding protecting the investments. So an overview of the core financial management concepts for AmeriCorps. And then closing out with a discussion around best practices and program and fiscal communication. All right, as well, we'll have a breakout room chat to take advantage of this large fiscal track turnout. So you'll have a chance to connect with some other fiscal staff and share some best practices. We'll have a quick moment to do some Q&A if there's any questions at the end of the session. And then finally, we'll connect you to the resources and send out that evaluation. All right, first and foremost, AmeriCorps News. So let's jump into the AmeriCorps News Channel 4 action van. Here we go. So, CNCS match waiver. Give me an MW for match waiver in the chat if you are already aware of this big news of the year. All right, a lot more excitement. Okay, a lot of people are jumping in. So I think there's a lot of excitement around the match waiver. I think people are happy that match has been waived. So let's take a deeper look at that. So the match waiver, CNCS, the Corporation for National and Community Service, has the regulatory authority to issue a blanket waiver for the match requirements. They have done so in order to add some relief to the COVID situation. So this applies to 2 AmeriCorps grant years. Type into the chat which 2 grant years this applies to. All right, exactly, thank you everyone. 2 grant years, 1920 and 2021. So as it pertains to your budget, really the guidance at the moment from CNCS is to budget available match sources, but to take advantage of the match waiver if relief is needed. So CNCS isn't looking to completely disregard match. Match is still important from a data perspective, it's still a good measure of impact and how much this investment is being leveraged. So you will keep sources of match in your 1920 budget if those sources are still available. So there's no need to adjust or amend your budget because of this waiver. However, if those sources have went away, you can certainly modify the budget to either replace those sources of match or to remove any sources that have washed up because of COVID. With the 2021 budget, we're going to encourage programs to budget available match. If you are undermatched or have zero match, we can take advantage of the waiver and still approve your AmeriCorps budget. Next, we have the OMB administrative flexibilities. So Anastasia, if you want to link to that in the chat. So another relief on the OMB side are some administrative flexibilities. This really pertains to staff costs. So if staff are working remotely, or if staff are unable to work because the physical location is closed, you can continue to still pay those staff members if the organization has a policy in place. Some things that policy would need to address is the policy effective dates. It's important to note here that you can backdate the policy to the beginning of when these circumstances began. OMB refers to these policies as unexpected circumstances policies, or continuation of pay under unexpected circumstances. So you can backdate these all the way back to March. They need to address the continuation of pay for staff who are unable to work due to reasons beyond their control. And this is extended to September 30th. The original OMB guidance was from March until June, at which point they re-upped the timeline. So now it's currently September 30th. It's likely we'll reach that point and they'll extend it once again. All right, looking ahead to AmeriCorps Grant Year 2021. So we are in grant startup mode. So budgets and financial surveys are currently available in Dropbox. So you can view the budget template in Dropbox. Once your budget is ready, you can upload that copy to Dropbox and notify your financial manager once that is ready. Same thing with the financial management survey. If you've already completed the survey for 1920, a lot of those policies might be already in Dropbox. Unless you made any updates to those policies, those can remain in Dropbox. So it's likely maybe just the financial management survey and audit will be updated in that case. These are due no later than September 30th. If your program is wanting to get up and running sooner than that and you're anticipating incurring expenses very soon and you would like to get reimbursed, you can certainly notify your financial manager to let them know that they should expedite that process so that we can prepare your reimbursement packet. If you need to get some instructions on how to build your budgets, I encourage you to view the budget instruction video that Michael created. That's part of the fiscal YouTube crash course. And also we have written budget instructions that will walk you through how the budget works tab by tab. All right, now a quick preview into what Dropbox will look like in 2021, since there are some minor changes. So looking at the folder structure, when you jump into AmeriCorps Grant Year 2021, you'll initially see 3 folders, one with terms and conditions, instructions, and resources. Folder number 2 is your AmeriCorps budget. So your draft AmeriCorps budget template is currently located there in Dropbox. And folder number 3 is all of the reimbursement request documents. So if we take a deeper dive into folder number 3, it's separated out into your current reimbursement workbook and then into those monthly request folders where you can upload documentation. So just an easier way to keep everything sort of neat and tidy in the AmeriCorps Dropbox. Another thing that will look slightly different going into Grant Year 2021 is that we have an updated reimbursement workbook. And this is a consolidated reimbursement workbook. So we've taken the usual expense and match workbook and have incorporated the staff summary, as well as the member living allowance for those programs that pay a full-time member. So it's important to know that you will have one single reimbursement workbook going into 2021. So no separate staff summary, no separate living allowance, just one workbook. All right, Reggie's already excited. So, important thing to note with the staff summary report. That staff summary report is a monthly report. Unlike the expense report, it doesn't maintain past months information. So you'll want to save that staff summary report as an individual PDF to make sure your financial manager can locate that. All right. We also have a new resource, a consolidated AmeriCorps reimbursement checklist. So taking a lot of this information, putting it into one helpful document. So this is where you can locate the AmeriCorps reimbursement checklist. So everything that you need to compile and get ready for your AmeriCorps reimbursement. It also includes reimbursement workbook instructions. So it'll walk you through the workbook tab by tab, sort of showing you how it works and ties together. Next, we have documentation guidance for typical YouthBuild expenses. So when it comes to collecting all of that backup documentation, this will give you some guidance as far as what meets the standard of backup documentation. And this will link to a lot of the uniform guidance regulations. And finally, all of the explicitly unallowable costs under AmeriCorps. All right, and an update on grant year 1819, which is winding down. So some programs may still have active 1819 members that are wrapping up service. We should be nearing the end of the 1819 grant year cycle. So the last date to submit reimbursements under grant year 1819 is September 30th, 2020. So if you still have an active 1819 grant, look at the balance of those funds and also look at member enrollments. So remember, money follows members. You'll want to look at the date of your final member when they exited the program, and you can incur expenses 30 days after that final member. All right, due September 30th. So all of our fiscal deadlines, September 30th, one single deadline. All right. So that covers fiscal updates. Now I'm going to jump into understanding protecting the investments. So if you've ever attended an AmeriCorps management conference in the past, I'm sure you're well aware of what this image represents. In the chat box, our role is to protect this investment against F, W, and A. What does the F stand for? Excellent. Fraud. All right. Moving on to W. What does W stand for? All right, waste. And finally, A. What does the A stand for? AmeriCorps. Abuse. All right. What do we think? All right, so our role is to protect this investment against fraud, waste, and abuse. So we want to protect the reputation of YouthBuild AmeriCorps. We want to protect the member experience and make sure that this resource is available for years to come. So YouthBuild USA's role in protecting the investment first starts with training and implementation. So it's our responsibility to make sure you are aware of fiscal grant requirements and how to implement the grants. Other side of the equation is our routine monthly monitoring process. So looking at those AmeriCorps reimbursement requests to make sure you are knowledgeable of the requirements. And the reason we do all this is to mitigate the risk of disallowed costs that could occur during an audit or during IPERIA testing. Just a quick look at what training and implementation looks like. So your first resource is really your AmeriCorps financial manager. So as I mentioned, now's a great time to reach out to your financial manager if you have any pressing questions going into grant year 2021. They are your main point of contact for any fiscal related inquiries. Of course, we always have the AmeriCorps fiscal track as a refresher and therefore new staff if they need to get up and running. We also have an AmeriCorps YouTube channel, so check out our playlist, like and subscribe. We put on regular webinars throughout the year. So you can check out the AmeriCorps newsletter from when those are occurring. And if you don't receive the AmeriCorps newsletter, I encourage you to reach out to your fiscal manager and they can add you to that list. And finally, we have our AmeriCorps Fiscal Help Docs, which is our archive of really all of our AmeriCorps fiscal resources and frequently asked questions. All right, so it is YouthBuild USA's responsibility as the prime grantee to demonstrate compliance. So it's the AmeriCorps terms and conditions as well as OMB uniform guidance that really drives the compliance side of our work. So I would describe your program's relationship with YouthBuild USA not so much as a direct line where we're providing you funding, but more as a circle that you're being brought into. So you're being brought into the YouthBuild AmeriCorps partnership, and all of these rules and regulations flow down to you at the sub-recipient level. So when you refer to the AmeriCorps terms and conditions, really they're referring you over to the uniform guidance, specifically around financial management and allowability of costs. So in a nutshell, if your program has the systems in place, they should be able to distinguish expenditures attributable to this award from expenditures that are not attributable to this award. So in other words, can your systems identify costs by program year as well as by budget category? So this is easier said than done. There's many policies and procedures that need to be in place to accomplish this depending on the type of expense it is. Go ahead and use the chat box and let me know if you can think of any policies and procedures that are in place at your organization that help you accomplish this. And there's several, so just about anything you name here is likely correct. All right, thank you. We create a separate fund for each grant year. All right. Any other policies, procedures? Exactly, cost allocation plan. All right. So I want you to think about your program's financial management systems and capacity. I know we have a lot of different organizations. We have some large universities. We have some small independent 501c3s. So, once you've seen one YouthBuild program, you've seen one YouthBuild program. Systems really look different at each program. Now, I want you to imagine if your organization were a vehicle of some kind. So maybe you're a large university, you're a freight train, maybe you're a Tesla, you're sleek, you've got all the modern financial systems. Maybe you're a pogo stick, maybe it's just you and you're bouncing along by yourself. Maybe it's a minivan. So let me know what your vehicle is. You can choose another vehicle. I've just got some examples on the screen, but let me know what kind of vehicle your organization is depending on your financial capacity. All right, roller skates. Unicycle. All right, so each program is different. It's really the financial management survey that does the assessment as far as your organization's capacity to manage federal funds. If you've been managing AmeriCorps for a few years now, or you've been managing Department of Labor funds, it's likely that you have a lot of these systems in place. So first and foremost is your most recent audit or your most recent single audit if you reach that dollar threshold. It's YouthBuild USA's responsibility to follow up on any of those audit findings. Next up is all of your written policies and procedures. So internal controls, your procurement plan, travel policies, conflict of interest, and your written cost allocation plan. Next up, we have some questions on funds management, so how you account for the grant in your official records. Part D on internal controls are some basic fundamental questions about how you manage these funds and separate duties across staff. And then finally, Part E is match monitoring, how you report, record, and allocate those match funds. All right, and we'll go more in depth into these key areas of compliance in our third and final session tomorrow. So moving on, talking about getting the green light for reimbursement. So once we have a signed subgrantee agreement, we've got the financial management survey in-house approved. We've got your most recent audit. We have your approved AmeriCorps budget. And keep in mind, there are a few additional items we may require depending on what's included in your budget. So if you have those in-kind sources of match, you'll also need to supply us with an in-kind commitment letter. to support the value of that in-kind contribution. If you utilize consultants, you'll need to submit a consultant form verifying they can receive federal funding. If your organization has an approved federally approved indirect cost rate, we'll need to receive that letter to verify what that rate is. And finally, if you have any new staff in the budget, we'll need criminal history check clearance dates for those staff. So once all of those things are in place, you'll receive a reimbursement packet email notification letting you know that your budget and survey has been approved and your reimbursement workbook is now available in Dropbox. So you've got the green light to start creating those requests. So then we get into the monthly AmeriCorps monitoring process through the ARR. So just a quick look at what that monitoring process looks like. We'll take a closer look at the reimbursement in our next session. But in a review, what we want to see is that you have an effective accounting system. So can you itemize each expenditure? And is it readily identifiable to the grants? And can it logically be assigned to your approved AmeriCorps budgets? So the headline here is that are AmeriCorps expenses easily identifiable in the official records? Next up, we have strong financial management policies and procedures. So we want to see that there is an accounting policy and procedures in place. You have a written cost allocation plan describing how you allocate expenses across multiple funding sources. You have a staff time and effort policy that describes how staff are charging their time to different funders, as well as staff position descriptions for staff that are being charged to the grants. So the headline here is, are internal controls in place and are costs fair and allowable? And finally, we want to see that you have the ability to run a good financial management system. So do you maintain financial reports that lead clearly back to the ledgers and the source documents? Do you document payroll through time and attendance records? Do you maintain written cost allocation procedures and individual time distribution records? And do you separate your financial responsibilities? So the headline here is there a clear paper trail? And can we see costs being allocated? Grant timeline and member enrollments. So now is a great time to look at member enrollments. You should be asking yourselves, do we currently have members enrolled under 1920? So a lot of our programs still have active 1920 members. So you can continue to build down that grant until 30 days after that final member exits. You should be looking ahead to grant year 2021, getting an idea of when those members will begin service. I know going into 2021, there's a lot of uncertainty. Some programs have members identified. They're just waiting on field print locations to open up so they can actually enroll those members. So look ahead at your 2021 grant timeline to see when those members will begin service, and you can start incurring expenses 30 days prior to that. And also get an idea of when all of your AmeriCorps members are expected to exit the program. So as you're looking at 1920, you'll want to look at your member roster report and look at when your final members will end their service. Now give me an E in the chat box if you have access to e-grants. All right, great to see. Not all fiscal staff have access to e-grants. You might have to reach out to your programmatic counterpart to get that member roster. They should be able to get you set up with an account if you would like to actually go into e-grants, pull open your program and look at who is currently enrolled and what their expected end date is. Another best practice is around spending and match. So you should be talking with your programmatic counterpart about, are we on track for spending down the grant before all of the AmeriCorps members have been exited? Are we on track for meeting the 50% match requirements? So you're still being held to the match requirement that you're budgeting for. However, this might change if you're entering grant year 2021 with less than 50% match. You may have a 45% match requirement or a 0 match requirement. You should also be discussing whether or not you currently need a budget modification. So some of the reasons you would need a budget modification is if you need to incorporate a new line item, or if you have a new staff person, if you are 10% over your entire budget, So that is both expense and match. Obviously, you'll need a budget mod if funding increases or decreases during the grant year, or if you need to swap out or incorporate new sources of match. Staff transitions. So has there been any staff transitions that would impact the budget? If so, you need to get all of that criminal history check documentation in place. What we want to avoid with the criminal history check process is that you have a staff person that starts working, but they do not complete a criminal history check. Then the fiscal person goes to complete a reimbursement request and it gets rejected by the program's financial manager because we currently do not have a clearance date. So in that case, there would be a lot more waiting. The program would have to run the check, provide the documents to the AmeriCorps portfolio manager to get that cleared, and then we could finally reimburse that request. So it could result in a gap between when the staff starts and when the check is run. You may need to charge that time to another funding source. It could be a large gap between when the program requests reimbursement and when they are reimbursed. And it's a lot of extra work for YouthBuild USA to have to review that packet twice, and also a lot of work for you to have to create that packet twice. The ideal situation is that staff start working, the CHC is completed, the staff can start tracking their time to the AmeriCorps grants. The program completes a budget mod to incorporate that new staff member with their criminal history check dates. The budget mod is approved, and then the program can proceed with compiling reimbursement requests. Another best practice is around general management of reimbursement files and the Dropbox. So the current expense and match Excel file should be uploaded each month. I know some programs upload a PDF copy, but it's really helpful for your financial manager to have the actual Excel copy just to see if there's any issues with formulas in that workbook. You should also notify AmeriCorps FSR at youthbuild.org once the reimbursement has been uploaded to Dropbox, and that'll give us a heads up to jump in there and take a look. If you're submitting multiple grant years at once, you may be submitting grant year 1920 reimbursements along with 2021, and it's also helpful to identify which grant year and which month have been submitted.